Apollo 9 was the first flight of all the equipment that we're going to take to the moon, where it was all together. It was also the first flight of the lunar module. It was pretty much of an engineering test flight.
We want to develop the techniques that we're going to have to use around the moon, and we're going to take the first shot at them here around the Earth.
To land on the moon, NASA needs a super lightweight lunar module that can detach from the main spacecraft in orbit.
Whenever I saw a model of the lunar module, it had these rigid sides and really looked strong. It turns out that the exterior is made out of cellophane and put together with Scotch tape and staples and it's mylar, and it's a very dangerous vehicle. And I said, you know, this thing is really a piece of junk. We're going to fly this flimsy thing.
Training pilots to fly this strange craft involves an even weirder contraption, the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle.
It truly did give you as close to the lunar dynamic environment as you could possibly get in the real world here on Earth. And they were so sensitive that we had ejection seats in them, and Neil Armstrong was one of the guys who ejected before his flight.
McDivitt commands Apollo 9. Its mission, test fly the lunar module, the LEM, in Earth orbit.
Apollo 9, you are go all the way. Everything looks good.
It's the final piece in the puzzle required for a lunar landing. After months of simulators and rehearsal, it's now time to check that the LEM can really fly in space.
It was a difficult vehicle to fly, but you had to learn how to do that vertical stuff because that's the way you landed on the moon.
In Earth orbit, McDivitt leaves the command module to detach and fly the lunar module solo. It's the first time a human flies a spacecraft not capable of bringing him back to Earth.
The lunar module didn't have a heat shield on it, and so it would have burned up on the way in. So our only way home to Earth was to get back to the command module. That's known as a motivator. So we were motivated to get back to the command module.
How does that sports car handle, Jim? Pretty nice.
Apollo 9 showed that the engineering aspects of the vehicles together and the lunar module were fine.
Hey, Dave, we're at 49 miles and we can still see you.
And it all went together in an unbelievably good way.
Now you're coming in.
So we had a good idea how all this stuff worked.
That's good looking there. There you go. I think you got a handle on it now. Good show, Spider. Okay, Houston, we're locked up.
Apollo 9 successfully demonstrates that the lunar lander can fly and rendezvous in space. One final journey must be taken before any attempt to land on the moon.
Apollo 10 was the first time the lunar module went to the moon. We flew this exact same profile on Apollo 10 as they were going to fly Apollo 11.
Apollo 10, you can tell the world that we have arrived.
Apollo 10. Gene Cernan, John Young, and Commander Tom Stafford rehearse a lunar landing right up to 10 miles from the moon's surface.
We detached in the lunar module, went down to 10 miles, we radar mapped, we photo mapped, we picked out the landing site.
It was great. We'd practiced so much in the simulator, we knew we could do it. You just pitch over and look out the window and know where you're going to land. It was pretty straightforward.
Charlie Brown, Houston, over. Roger, read your last clear. Snoopy was go for DOI. Sounds great, we copy.
It's impressive to go that fast, that close, and 47,000 is pretty close after you've gone 250,000 miles.
You look down and you're amazed at the giant craters, in particular the boulders. They're as big as a 40 or 50-story building or bigger.
Oh, Houston, this is Snoopy. Right, Snoop, go ahead. It's going. We is down among them, Charlie. Roger, I hear you weaving your way up the freeway. Can you give me a post-burn report, over? Hey, Joe, we're about ready to dock. Roger that.
The mission was to paint that white line in the sky so Neil wouldn't get lost.
Apollo 10 is a success. The next mission is cleared to attempt a landing on the moon. Apollo 11's commander is to be Neil Armstrong.
Apollos 7, 8, 9, and 10 had all done a great job. Each flight achieved all its objectives, giving Apollo 11 all the information that was needed to try a descent to the lunar surface.
Michael Collins, command module pilot, and Buzz Aldrin, lunar module pilot. They're training for the mission that will make some of the biggest news in history.
Neil Armstrong, the consummate professional, the Iceman, the kind of guy that would always remain an American hero. Buzz Aldrin we had worked with in Gemini. He was the guy that was working by checklist. He had an intuitive feel for this thing called orbital mechanics and descent trajectories and abort trajectories right on down the line. Mike Collins, almost the astute professor, the kind of guy that you wanted to have in your hip pocket if things got tight. Neil Armstrong recognized the intensity of the training, the intensity of mission preparation for the first landing. I worked with Neil and Buzz and Mike Collins, probably starting about 3 months out.
As launch date nears, the media spotlight swings towards NASA and the team that is preparing for a mission many believe is not possible. The interest is worldwide.
The module, together with its power unit and main engine, which sits underneath it down there, is what's generally referred to as the mother spacecraft.
For the BBC, James Burke makes numerous special reports leading up to the launch.
Inside, it's even more cramped than it looks from outside, for 3 men, all of whom are about 5'11" each. The lunar module pilot, Buzz Aldrin, lies in that couch there. In the center couch, which has been taken out to let us get in, Michael Collins, the command module pilot, and Neil Armstrong, the man who will be the first to set foot on the moon, the commander, flies in the left-hand couch here.
You had the feeling that this team was in Super Bowl form. They were capable of accomplishing anything that would come their way.
Less than 6 months before President Kennedy's famous deadline, the moon explorers are ready to launch.
The astronauts then sat down to breakfast. They had a menu of filet mignon, scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, and tea. This is Apollo launch control. We're still aiming toward our planned liftoff at the start of the lunar window, 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight.
You did all the worrying before the flight, and you did all the training and the testing before the flight. And I think once you climb on board, you're ready to go. So it was just an adventure. I mean, that's why we all volunteered.
This is Apollo launch control, T-minus 3 hours, 4 minutes, 32 seconds and counting. Right on time as far as the astronauts countdown is concerned. The prime crew now departing from their crew quarters here at the Kennedy Space Center. The transfer van now departing on the start of its 8-mile trip to Launch Pad A here at Complex 39. Right now, our count at 3 hours, 3 minutes and counting.
As the Apollo 11 crew approach their ride to the moon, nearly 1 million people have gathered at the Cape to witness and take part in history.
Everybody was coming to the Cape. They were all the RVs, all of them around. You couldn't get a hotel room anywhere near. I mean, they were sold out up to 100 miles away. It's just unbelievable that the people who came and tried to get on the Cape. It was really something.
Astronauts report it feels good.
I could watch the sunrise and the waves coming in and the evidence of the crowds. And I felt the calmness with this giant rocket. It was something that I wanted to remember as the sun was rising on a very eventful day.
Once Armstrong and Collins are aboard, then Aldrin will be called and he will take the middle seat in the spacecraft. This is Apollo's launch control. We passed the 6-minute mark in our countdown for Apollo 11, the flight to land of the first men on the moon. The swing arm now coming back as our countdown continues. Firing command coming in now. We're on an automatic sequence as the master computer supervises hundreds of events occurring over these last few minutes. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5,
Once the spacecraft rockets out of Earth orbit, the astronauts settle in for a 3-day ride to the moon. Back at Houston, a much larger team is hard at work to keep the mission on course.
To me, the crew was sort of the tip of the iceberg. There are 400,000 people underneath them in various roles that supported the flight. And you might have thought you were invincible, but you weren't going to make it to the moon without everybody doing their job.
One of the things I have always been compelled to do is to very emotionally talk to my people about what we are about to do.
On the 5th day after launch, Apollo 11 faces its mission objective.
I start off, to a great extent, laying out what we intend to do. I say from the day we were born, we were meant to be in this room. Whatever we will do in this room today, I will stand behind every decision that you will make. We came into this room as a team, and we will leave this room as a team. Because from this moment forward, we're going to lock those control room doors. And no controller will enter this room or leave this room until we have either landed in the moon, we have crashed into the moon, or we have aborted the landing. And only one of those things is good, the other two are bad.
Aldrin and Armstrong have moved into the lunar module.
We separate the command module from the lunar module.
Roger, how does it look? Roger.
We did that so that our orbit remained the same, and Mike moved away from us briefly.
Listen, babe, everything's going just swimmingly. Beautiful.
And after the separation maneuver, we came back again on the backside of the moon while we made a maneuver to a lower orbit.
Houston Eagle, how do you read? Bye-bye, Eagle. We're standing by for your burn report, over. Roger, the burn was on time.
Tempo in the room picks up right as we acquire spacecraft telemetry, and we immediately got problems.
X and Z notes.
We got communications problems you cannot believe.
Columbia, Houston, we've lost all data with Eagle. Please have him reacquire on the high gain, over.
Houston loses direct communication with the lander.
Columbia, Houston, we've lost him. Tell him to go aft on me, over.
Kranz improvises.
Charlie Duke is my principal communicator, voicing instructions up to Mike Collins, who is passing the instructions on to Neil and Buzz in the lunar module.
Eagle, Houston, we recommend y'all 10 right will help us on the high gain signal strength, over. Houston, now, Houston. Eagle, we got you now. It's looking good, over.
But we finally keep it all together, and at the descent minus 5 minutes, I give the go for powered descent.
You're a go to continue powered descent. You're a go to continue powered descent. Eagle, we got you now. It's looking
This
good,
will
over.
mark Apollo 11's greatest and unique challenge, landing an experimental vehicle on unknown ground. As a seasoned test pilot commander, Armstrong has been training for this moment all his career.
The descent was very tricky business.
Whenever I saw a model of the lunar module, it had these rigid sides and really looked strong. It turns out that the exterior is made out of cellophane and put together with Scotch tape and staples and it's mylar, and it's a very dangerous vehicle. And I said, you know, this thing is really a piece of junk. We're going to fly this.
Got the engine start. Liftoff. We have liftoff at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
McDivitt commands Apollo 9. Its mission?
Apollo 9 was the first flight of all the equipment that we're going to take to the moon, where it was all together. It was also the first flight of the lunar module. It was pretty much of an engineering test flight.
We want to develop the techniques that we're going to have to use around the moon, and we're going to take the first shot at them here around the Earth.
To land on the moon, NASA needs a super lightweight lunar module that can detach from the main spacecraft in orbit.
This flimsy thing.
Training pilots to fly this strange craft involves an even weirder contraption, the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle.
It truly did give you as close to the lunar dynamic environment as you could possibly get in the real world here on Earth. And they were so sensitive that we had ejection seats in them, and Neil Armstrong was one of the guys who ejected before his flight.
Test fly the lunar module, the LEM, in Earth orbit.
Apollo 9, you are go all the way. Everything looks good.
It's the final piece in the puzzle required for a lunar landing. After months of simulators and rehearsal, it's now time to check that the LEM can really fly in space.
It was a difficult vehicle to fly, but you had to learn how to do that vertical stuff.